just going to do my sharing stuff as people are joining already. Thanks for joining us. It's February already, eh?
I know. Time
Well,
flies.
I think it flies a little bit more because, we're under a lockdown.
Mhm.
And, obviously I think we're loosening up soon, but I'm not negative on any of that. I'm just saying that the days blur together when
Yeah.
you
I
don't leave the
just
house.
self lockdown. I never leave the house anyways. So I don't even know when there is a lockdown or not because it's like home, grocery store, home, grocery store, home, grocery store.
Well, you see, there's where you and I differ. I get my groceries delivered.
There we go. I do all my social events and everything online. So I was like, I might as well have one reason to leave the house.
Yeah, absolutely. I go for walks and that's about it.
Mhm.
But when we have huge snowstorms and stuff, but yeah, I'm not leaving the house right now, unfortunately, because that means the days blur together. Like what used to be my mark, oh, today's Tuesday, it's startup drinks. Today's
Mhm.
Wednesday, it's this. All my events that I have to go to. I think not physically going to them makes it a little the time blur together a little bit more.
Mhm.
Welcome everyone. I hope you have lots of questions for Alex. We're going to get into it in just a minute or two, letting people join. It's only 12:01. If you have questions, put them in the chat room in the Q&A window. If you're thinking about equity crowdfunding this year, when were you thinking about it? Are you thinking about it this quarter, next quarter? Let us know. Throw that in the chat room, and happy to chat to you about it. And if you want to let us know, if you want to share with the rest of the audience in the chat room, throw a link to your startup. Let us know what you're working on. We'd love to take a look. So I've had some interesting conversations recently because, as you know, we were talking just before we went online here. We're launching a bunch of new audio video series. Who are these investors? Who are these startups? Canadian startup resources. I had a great interview with Michael Hyatt this morning. Do you know Michael Hyatt? Um,
Not personally.
Creative Destruction Lab. He's a serial entrepreneur, one of the founders of Creative Destruction Lab. He's a heavy active investor. He's part of a senior advisor of Northleaf Investors. Anyway, he's been around and around. Very great conversations with him. We're going to get him back, I think, and do, ask me anything with him, kind of, and get everybody on to talk because it's interesting to talk about
Mm.
all the different stuff. And I really love the format. Thanks for some of those questions. I think it's going to be interesting for the audience.
Mhm.
How much do they invest? How often do they invest? Are they still looking to invest? Where's their fund at? What are the things they want to see? What are the things they don't want to see? It's pretty interesting content, and they're short. They're about 10 minutes, so
Mhm.
um, I think it'll be easy consumable when people are looking to talk to investors and they want to know what they're like. We're going to have lots of content for them there as well. And if anybody here is wants to be featured, either if they're an investor on, let me know. Email Craig at TorontoStarts.com. But we're also doing interviews of startups in the Startup Talk podcast or our new feature on who are these startups. So email me, Craig, CRAIG, at TorontoStarts.com if you want to be featured, and we'll start the conversation. We also have a bunch of other things going on. I just wanted to mention, take a look at TorontoStarts.com/events before we get started because there is a lot going on this month. We have a pitch school where you come out, you do your 90-second pitch, and you get pitch advice from me and Will Greenblatt from Out Loud Speaker School. He's one of the best pitch coaches in the city. He charges over $500 an hour. You're going to get free advice, get your pitch out there, come by. You can be anonymous. You don't even have to say the name of your company or your name if you don't want to. We just want your pitch. And we're investor speed dating on the 17th. So if you want to meet with investors one on one, talk with founders in the main room, join us for that. On the 24th, it's Startup Pitch Battle, which is our pitch competition. So go to our website. You can apply to compete or watch, and the winners are chosen by you, the audience. So you get to vote and decide which of the four is the best winner. And we get a bunch of feedback from our panel of investors. There's lots of other stuff going on. I'm interviewing Chris Carter, Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Schulich School of Business, among all his other accolades, an investor. Elevate Entrepreneurship with Trevor Short. There's a new Women and BIPOC incubator program, so he's going to talk all about that. And Vibe Hard Kombucha is coming in, so we're going to talk about, alcoholic kombucha and launching that as a startup. And there's so many other things going on. So if you're interested in any of that, check out TorontoStarts.com/events. It's great to see some of our friends around. George, it's been a while. We were just talking, it's February already. And I see a bunch of other friendly faces in here. Great to see everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. I'm going to throw it over to Alex. But if you have questions, throw them in the chat room. Throw them in the Q&A room. If you're on YouTube, throw them in the live comment section there. You'll see me posting comments in a minute. And we'll get them. I'll get to them at the end, and I'll ask Alex all about them. Like if you want to have questions about crowdfunding in your specific area, or specific amounts, or specific rules to you, don't hesitate. Throw them in the chat room so we can get them on the list and get those questions answered. Is there anything else you want to add before we get started?
No, I think that's everything, Craig.
All right. Sometimes I just get into it and I forget stuff. So welcome everyone to Equity Crowdfunding in 2022. And with me today is Managing Director of Equivesto, Alex Morsink. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great, Craig. Thanks for having me.
So it's great to have you. And the rules have changed. I had you on mid last year when the rules had changed, and we're now in 2022. We've had a lot more people going through crowdfunding. We've had a lot more shakeout about these cross-provincial rules, and we might as well get into it right away. I'll throw it over to you. Equity crowdfunding, startups can raise up to $1.5 million per year using their crowd.
Exactly. That's exactly what they can do. And it's been very exciting to sort of go through these changes and to bring in the new rules in Canada. So that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to go over not just, okay, what are the rules that were introduced in late 2021? How do they work? What even is crowdfunding? But also, what is crowdfunding looking like internationally? What's changed, and how has the international community moved forward, and how is that sort of also being mirrored in Canada? So let's dive right in with what is crowdfunding. So again, just covering some of the basics up front, but there's three different types of crowdfunding. There's donation-based crowdfunding. So you can think of that as a Indiegogo campaign to raise money, potentially in the US for healthcare or something like that. Rewards-based crowdfunding. So this is a Kickstarter where you're pre-purchasing a product essentially. And then of course there's equity crowdfunding, which is what we're here to talk about today. And equity crowdfunding is all about connecting companies, whether they're startups or small businesses, with a large pool of interested investors. And those investors invest through a platform, and that platform helps combine and sort of group all these smaller investors investing in amounts as little as $100 and bringing that together to help support one company. So a large group of people making small investments can now have a bigger impact investing in companies. So what exactly do investors get? As I'm sure you know, investors through equity crowdfunding are purchasing shares of the business or units. So they're actually buying pieces of ownership in the company, just like you would on a stock market, as opposed to getting some reward like you would in other crowdfunding. Often the shares are non-voting common shares, but they can also be preferred shares with dividends or a variety of other structures. Because they're getting actual ownership of the shares, there is a lot more regulation around equity crowdfunding than compared to other types of crowdfunding. So where does crowdfunding really fit in the sort of capital life cycle and raising trajectory of a business? And this ties into what's changed in 2021. But the limits for equity crowdfunding used to be up to $500,000 per year in Canada. And those in September of last year were raised to $1.5 million. So equity crowdfunding has really expanded its accessibility and usability for startups to really mirror the stage of angel investors, or even making use of equity crowdfunding after an angel round. We're starting to see a lot more venture capital firms being interested in and investing alongside companies that are doing an equity crowdfunding round. And equity crowdfunding itself can be useful almost as a carry-on round. So you would raise capital from angels or VCs, and then bring on sort of additional capital from the crowd after you have a lead investor, either a VC firm or an angel. So the usability of equity crowdfunding has really expanded. So what does equity crowdfunding look like internationally, and what has happened sort of in what's sort of the highlights of 2021 internationally? So when we look at the two most similar and largest equity crowdfunding markets, we're really looking at the US and the UK. So in the US, it's been around since 2012, 2016, really for the general public. And there's been 4 main platforms really doing equity crowdfunding in the US. And in 2021, they had the largest, biggest year of equity crowdfunding in the United States, with over $500 million raised by companies through equity crowdfunding in 2021 in the US alone, with that expected to double in 2022. So when we're looking at 2022 in the US, we're seeing massive traction and massive growth in the adoption of equity crowdfunding. If we look to the UK, it's a similar story. It's been around since 2012. The market is largely dominated by 2 players, Seedrs and Crowdcube. And they've had almost £1 billion invested in 2021 just through those 2 platforms alone. And that's really expected to grow rapidly next year and going forward. Also, in December of 2021, big news, Republic, as you can see on the US side of the slide, actually purchased Seedrs on the UK side for over $100 million. So for the first time, we have a sort of cross-border platform that's going to be developed. Right now, obviously, they're still totally separate entities, given Republic just bought Seedrs, a month ago, but I'm sure they're going to find a way to sort of coordinate and develop so that they can share both investors and companies across borders. And Seed Invest, another US platform, also invested over $12 million in Crowdcube. So we're starting to see larger players in the United States looking to make acquisitions and partner with other platforms as they look to expand their market. In Canada, Start Engine in the US has done a partnership with Front Funder, competitor of Equivesto's, my company, and they did a raise for Start Engine on Front Funder just last year. So we're starting to see more US players engaging with Canadian players as they grow and look to sort of expand their influence. So what does equity crowdfunding look like in Canada in 2022? So just as a recap over some of the rules around equity crowdfunding. So as I mentioned earlier, equity crowdfunding is regulated. It's issuing securities to investors, and that's regulated by the securities regulators. Internationally, there's typically one securities regulator for the entire country. But Canada, where we like to be a little bit different. So we have an individual securities regulator for each province. And if you ask me why that is, I cannot really tell you. And I don't think anyone else in the industry can either. Essentially, everyone's been kind of confused why there's so many and looking to create one Canadian securities regulator for some time. It was something that the Conservatives under Stephen Harper wanted to do, and then the Liberals under Trudeau wanted to do. And so it's on both sides of the aisle, people have wanted to do this. And essentially the individual provinces haven't wanted to give up their unique control over securities in their own markets. And so we just continue to not really have much progress. What that means is the rules can sometimes be fragmented and not coordinate across the provinces. Stepping back from that for a moment, in Canada, whenever a company is looking to issue securities or stock or allow people to invest in it, the law calls for them to use a legal document called a prospectus. But prospectuses are very long and very expensive to create, and typically they are created by public companies. And so the regulators in each province have created prospectus exemptions that allow companies to raise capital without the need to create a full prospectus. A prospectus exemption is essentially a doorway through which to raise capital legally. So in Ontario, there's 13 different prospectus exemptions, and equity crowdfunding as a concept has been turned into and basically legalized in Canada with the creation of a specific prospectus exemption for that. Initially, there were some rules introduced in 2016, but they were limited and sort of disagreed across provinces. But finally, and this is what Craig and I talked about earlier in 2021, finally, one unified set of rules that makes sense and is usable was released in September of 2021. We're very happy that that's happened. We were actually able to work with the regulators and provide some feedback on those rules. And we're very excited that those rules were introduced. The rules are officially called Prospectus Exemption NI 45-110 Startup Crowdfunding. That's the official name for the rule if you want to look it up. But this is essentially, finally, equity crowdfunding rules that apply essentially across Canada and are usable. So when we talk about, okay, what does equity crowdfunding look like in Canada in 2022, it's really what is the impact of these new rules and how is that going to change equity crowdfunding for the future of Canada. So these rules are really changing the accessibility and usability of equity crowdfunding. Before this, Canada wasn't really able to offer equity crowdfunding to either startups or investors in the same way that comparable firms in the US or the UK could, where everything was unified, the rules were usable and accessible. None of that was really in place. So now we're starting to see some really clear market trends starting out internationally, but with the consistent set of rules in Canada, they will be able to flow and trickle down into the Canadian sort of local market. So if we look internationally, the crowdfunding market itself is estimated to hit 200 billion by 2025. And I know you're like, oh, that's 5 years from now. I'm just reminding you that we're in 2022. So that's 3 years from now. So that's a pretty huge growth and increase. And really the perception of equity crowdfunding, where does equity crowdfunding fit in the sort of startup and the funding landscape? That's really started shifting in Canada, but it's already shifted internationally. So when it first sort of entered the world stage, crowdfunding is really sort of seen as like, the less preferred sibling to angel or venture capital funding. It was sort of thought, well, if you can't get VC funding, I guess you have to go for equity crowdfunding. Internationally, that has totally changed, and that change is sort of already finished. So we're seeing tons of companies successfully raising through equity crowdfunding. It's totally seen as a viable method of raising capital, and pretty much all VCs are happy to work alongside equity crowdfunding platforms, acting as a lead investor or investing alongside in a joint investment. And there's no challenges with having shareholders from an equity crowdfunding round on the cap table of any startup. So that internationally has really kind of solved itself, and we're really starting to see that be mirrored in Canada. Even conversations that I've had, and every time I run into another member of the VC or angel community, I always sort of poll them on this, because I want to be able to have and address any problems or questions that somebody in the industry might have. And so far, having spoken with dozens of investors, VCs, angels across the startup community in Canada, everyone is quite open and supportive of equity crowdfunding and is happy to invest alongside equity crowdfunding investors without there being a sort of negative impact seen on the cap table. So that change and that piece of progress is really fantastic in terms of, okay, how does the space look for startups looking to crowdfund, and where does crowdfunding fit for potential startups? So let's talk a little bit about these new rules that came in 2021, because these rules are directly impacting and has really changed what equity crowdfunding can be for a startup. Before, it was not very usable and quite restrictive. Now with these new rules, startup crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding in general are very accessible for Canadian companies. And we will start to see the growth in adoption of equity crowdfunding in Canada to match that of the US and the UK over the next few years. So when looking at equity crowdfunding, if you're a startup trying to decide where do I want to raise my capital, there's some important things to know about who you can actually work with. What is the platform you're going to go and work with, and where are you going to put your offering? The startup crowdfunding rules restrict you to choosing one platform at a time. You can't put your offering on multiple platforms. So you have to make sure you pick the right platform for you. And there's two main differentiators between who is allowed to operate a platform according to the rules. Essentially, you can have an exempt crowdfunding portal. Essentially, the idea is this portal is not fully licensed as a securities dealer or anything like that in Canada. And it's simply a listing location for a company to put their offering. They have to meet certain reporting requirements, but they're only allowed to use the one startup crowdfunding exemption that we've already talked about, that 45-110. They're also limited to take a maximum of $1,500 per campaign from investors, and they can't take anything more than that. So even if you're, as a startup, you have an accredited investor who's interested, who wants to invest in your business, the most you can take per person is $1,500 using one of these exempt funding portals. And that is because since the portal is not fully licensed as a securities dealer, they're not doing something called know your customer or suitability. So they're not looking at every investor, determining their situation, and providing them, financial advice around the different investment choices that the person is considering. That is required to be able to allow larger investments. The majority of equity crowdfunding platforms operating in Canada, so Equivesto, our competitor Front Funder, another platform Vested out in BC, we are all exempt market dealers. And essentially, an exempt market dealer is a fully licensed securities dealer. So we can use all of the prospectus exemptions. In Ontario, I mentioned there were 13. So one of those is the accredited investor exemption, friends and family, a bunch of others, as well as the startup crowdfunding. So we can take the general public, but we can also take accredited investors, angel investors investing much larger amounts through our platform. We're able to do that as exempt market dealers because we're completing a full know your product and know your customer review on every company, on every investor who's signing up, and doing suitability assessments. So we are doing a full due diligence on every startup and working with every investor to understand their personal scenario and provide them individualized investment limits. Because we do that, we can allow investors up to $10,000 per investment if they're members of the general public. And if they're confirmed as accredited investors or angel investors, they can allow much, much larger amounts in the hundreds of thousands or more. So first thing to remember when you're thinking, okay, equity crowdfunding in Canada, what's allowed? If you're thinking about the amount you can raise 1.5 million. And who can invest? Canadians can invest, and they can invest up to $10,000 per campaign if approved by the platform, and accredited investors can invest any amount if you're working with an exempt market dealer. So here's a sort of quick summary of that. Retail investors, so the general public, basically everyone living in Canada who's over 18 years old. When looking at which provinces have signed on to that sort of universal set of rules, the startup crowdfunding 45-110 rules, actually a few other provinces and territories have not signed on. So 8 provinces have signed up, but the ones who have not are the 3 territories. So Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, as well as 2 provinces, PEI, and Newfoundland. So if you happen to live in any of those 5 jurisdictions, feel free to call your local securities regulator and say, why didn't you sign up for 45-110? I would like to participate in equity crowdfunding. But for everyone living in the other 8 provinces, you can invest through equity crowdfunding. As I mentioned, the maximum investment per company with advice from an exempt market dealer is up to $10,000 now. And there's no fixed annual limits. Accredited investors can also invest at the same time, and they can invest any amount they would like. As I mentioned, the people who can't participate are in those 5 provinces and territories that I discussed. Also, because equity crowdfunding is a securities offering, you are limited by securities laws. If you're looking for international investors to participate, especially international investors that aren't accredited investors, the answer is basically no, they're not able to participate through a Canadian equity crowdfunding platform. The rules, the 45-110 rules that allow equity crowdfunding, requires the investor to be a resident of the province where the rules are allowed, and requires the company to be headquartered in Canada. So if you're, it's basically siloed by country. So you can, whatever country your startup is working in, you need to follow your securities laws, and you need to take investors from your country. There's not a lot of cross-border investing going on. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Republic and Cedars based on that acquisition that I mentioned. Be interesting to see how that plays out. So you're a company, what can you, how do you apply? What do you need, and what can you raise? So to list on a platform, you need to be operating in Canada, can be a corporation or a partnership. You can raise up to a maximum of 1.5 million through equity crowdfunding over a rolling 12-month period. Worth noting, we're talking about equity crowdfunding restrictions using this 45-110 set of rules. If you have accredited investors investing at the same time using a different prospectus exemption, that does not consume your $1.5 million maximum amount. So if you have an accredited investor come in and invest in your business through a platform and they invest $500,000, that doesn't take up the $1.5 million that you can raise through equity crowdfunding. Companies are not required to prepare financial statements. They are required to have a sort of minimum viable product, or at least a demo version of your product or service, but you don't need to have revenue. Campaigns can last up to a maximum of 90 days. And in the campaign style, you need to set a minimum and a maximum raise target. If the minimum target isn't reached, the funds are automatically refunded to investors. And once the campaign is finished, you have to file a one-time filing called a report of exempt distribution with the regulators in every province that you raised in. Are there any ongoing reporting requirements? The only ongoing requirement for reporting is the reporting requirement that every business in Canada has, which is to have an annual shareholders meeting. There's no additional ongoing reporting required. And who specifically cannot participate in equity crowdfunding? The 45-110 rules specifically do not allow passive investment funds where the only purpose of the business is to simply invest in other companies, or a public company cannot use this exemption. So which businesses work best and which businesses don't work as well? So the businesses that do work best are both startups and small businesses. So companies that are going to capture people's imagination, have a strong community, and are creating a positive impact are going to be really successful, because they'll be able to go out, get people excited about what they're doing, and bring them in. What doesn't work as well? So if you're a company that doesn't have a clear value in the business itself, and the business value is only generated based on individual employees that you have, for example, a consulting company, that won't do as well. Also, if you have a highly technical B2B business that isn't well or easily explained to the public, and you don't have a strong community, it might be challenging to run a successful crowdfunding campaign. Okay, so you think you're a fit for equity crowdfunding, you're comfortable with all the requirements. What documents do you need to apply? So you basically need some organizing structural documents for your business. So certificate of incorporation, capitalization table, organizational chart, business plan, pitch deck, shareholders agreement, You need financial statements, but those are optional. And financial projections are definitely helpful to understand, where your business is going and what you're hoping to achieve over the next 5 years. You also need to know how much you'd like to raise and what you want to use the funds for. And last, but certainly not least, you also need to prepare a 45-110 offering document. If you work with a platform like Equivesto, we will help you prepare the vast majority of that document. But what is the offering document? Essentially, the offering document is a 20 to 30 page summary of everything an investor would need to know about investing in your company. So it includes details on the background of the company, the founders, the terms of the deal, who the platform is that you're working with, what rights do your investors have, what are the risks of investing, how long is the campaign, your funding goals, what you'll use the money for, everything like that. This document is provided to investors through the duration of the campaign and is included in the filing that you make to the regulators within that 30-day period after the campaign. So this is a very important document that gets prepared by Equivesto. So we would draft about 80% of this document, and then you would work on the remaining 20% with your legal counsel to make sure it's perfect and signed off. But that's everything that you need to be able to go out and run an equity crowdfunding campaign. And that's sort of what 2022 is looking like for equity crowdfunding in Canada and internationally. If you want to learn more, you can visit Equivesto's Learning Center, which is equivesto.com/learn. You can also join our new community. We just launched the Equivesto community this morning, actually, and it's a free online location for companies and investors to get access to tons more information, articles, and knowledge about investing, not just related to Equivesto or investing in startups, but investing in general. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions.
That was great, Alex. We have a few questions already. Put them in the chat room or in the comment section on YouTube, and we'll get right to them.
Yes, I see some
So,
in the chat.
yeah, I've got them here, so I kind of sorted out.
Perfect.
What would you recommend to apply for crowdfunding if you have a B2B business model? And I'm going to follow that up with what are the challenges for a B2B startup to raise equity crowdfunding?
Right. So if you have I'll be rather direct. Assuming your business is, legal, not fraudulent, you have a strong business model, and all those things and all the due diligence, okay, what's going to separate a successful business doing a crowdfund and a not successful business? It's going to be the strength of your community. The crowdfunding platform is a doorway that allows you to bring through investors like your community, the general public, that sort of stuff. But it's not a source of investors. So if you have a business, even if it's a B2B business, but you have a strong personal community, you have a strong network of individuals surrounding the business that are all interested in investing in it, then you can definitely have a successful campaign. But if you have a B2B business and you've been in stealth mode for 2 years developing it, you haven't even told your best friend about it, and you've talked to a couple different clients and started working on that, but there's not really a lot of public awareness for your business, that will make it very challenging to sort of do that. You would probably want to spend several months building a community first before looking to run an equity crowdfunding campaign.
Good advice. I've got a few more questions here. Let's go with this one. As a startup, we have a small network and are just building a following. We would love to crowdfund, but are worried that we don't have a big enough community to really raise the amount we would like. Can your platform help out with that?
It's a great question, Brock. There's sort of two pieces to that. So when a company does crowdfund on Equivesto, for example, we do, once you reach 10% of your target, your minimum target raise amount, we do help promote and talk to people about your offering. So your offering would be extended to, all the thousands of people signed up on Equivesto who get our newsletter. We would post about it on social media, all that sort of stuff. But that's all during your campaign. When you're sort of thinking about building and preparing for a campaign, that's really where you want to do the work to make sure your community is the right size. When you think about the total amount of money that you want to raise, the first third of that is really going to come from your immediate community. The second third is going to come from sort of the extended people beyond that immediate community. And then the final third is going to come from external people who hear about what you're doing through press releases, social media, and promotion from the platform or anything like that. So building that initial community and extended community beforehand is really important. But Equivesto also helps you with that. So even before your campaign is run, if you're signing up to work on Equivesto, we will help you build a community organically, and we will give you advice and tips around how to grow that community before you're even launching your campaign. Also, we do recommend companies consider working with a specialized equity crowdfunding marketing firm and deploying some capital for that purpose, because they really know how to build and grow a community really successfully to help drive successful campaigns. They're specialists at the marketing aspect of this. So we can help provide a lot of free support and education in the months leading up to the campaign. We have companies that we're working with right now who are going to be building their community for probably the next 4 to 5 months. And then they're going to launch their campaign like in the summer or in the fall, but we're already working with them to help them. So it's never too early to start working on building and growing your community. And we're happy to help provide as much free support as we can to do that. We can also connect you with people who specialize in this if you're looking for some paid support to build that community. And we do let people know and sort of talk about your raise when it is happening for sure. But the work you want to do to build that community should come well before your raise is started.
All right, we've got a few questions here, and I'll try and tie some of them together. First of all, it's about multiple times. So
Okay.
can you do multiple crowdfunding in a sequence based on the progress of your startup?
Definitely.
And if so, how often?
So you can, and this is another change in these new rules that came in 2021, which is fantastic. So before you could only run 2 campaigns per year, essentially. Now, as long as you don't raise more than the 1.5 million through the equity crowdfunding exemption, you can run as many campaigns as you like. We actually have an issuer currently on Equivesto that ran a campaign, was successful, was way over their minimum, and then they essentially started a new campaign right after that. Like the campaign closed and the new campaign started like 5 minutes later. So they just continued that positive momentum. And they're going to essentially do like monthly campaigns or something like that. So you can continue to run as many campaigns as you like sequentially, as long as you don't pass the 1.5 million. We would potentially recommend, if you have milestones that you're working towards and you're building up as you sort of are growing your business, potentially raise to help achieve each milestone. So you go out, you raise 200,000 or 300,000 for the first milestone. You close the campaign, you get the money, you work for a couple of months, you achieve that milestone, you reach the goal that raises the value of the company. And then you come back for another campaign, maybe 6 months later, and you say, hey, look, we said we were going to do these things with the money you gave us. You gave us the money. We did everything we said. Now the value has gone up. So the investors who participated before are seeing an increase in their return, but also, we're going back out to the market saying you can invest again. And we've shown that we've delivered on the promises we made. We've seen that be quite successful. One example we love to use is a company that raised in the UK on the Crowdcube platform called Brewdogs. And they raised 6 times over a number of years, and they ended up becoming a unicorn. And they're just a brewery. So they started out as a small local brewery making beer, and they raised 6 different times, with the last one valuing them at over £1 billion. So you can definitely raise multiple times through equity crowdfunding.
If I raised on another platform, can I come over to Equivesto after that?
You certainly can. We help prepare and make sure all the right legal pieces are in place, and we work with you and your lawyers to make sure everything's done properly. But you can raise multiple times on different platforms. You can't raise concurrently, so you can't have 2 raises active on 2 different platforms, but you could raise on one and then switch and raise on another. Equivesto does offer no upfront fees for companies who have already raised on Equivesto to come back and raise again. And I'm sure there's some incentive offered by each platform to encourage companies to return, but there's nothing against you raising at different times on different platforms.
Great. So we've got a couple of foreign companies here. So I've got a couple of questions around that. So
Sure.
what you mentioned that, it has to be Canadian ownership kind of thing. What does it take for a foreign-based startup to use equity crowdfunding in Canada?
Certainly. So it depends if you're looking to use equity crowdfunding in Canada to raise from Canadian investors. The rules are quite clear. To use the 45-110 exemption that we've been talking about, you need to be operating in Canada with your head office in Canada. So if you're a foreign company, you would need to be set up and operating in Canada and have your headquarters in Canada to be able to raise here using equity crowdfunding. You could use other prospectus exemptions to raise in Canada, even if you're not a Canadian business, but that would not necessarily be equity crowdfunding. That might be something called the offering memorandum exemption and a few other things that you could think about. Those exemptions often come with increased costs and requirements, which could be prohibitive, like audited financial statements, which might cost $10,000 or something like that. But as long as the company is operating in Canada and have its head office in Canada, technically that would qualify it based on the 45-110 rules.
So I'm going to drill down just a little deeper here.
Yep.
You mentioned the other exemptions. You also mentioned early on Equivesto can handle a whole bunch of exceptions. So if somebody
Mm-hmm.
came to you um, from another country and wanted to do this, would you be doing this memorandum exception?
So yeah, so the offering memorandum
Thank
exemption,
you.
we have an offer currently on Equivesto raising using the offering memorandum exemption. So we certainly can have offerings on our platform with that. The offering memorandum we don't prepare; it has to be prepared by your legal counsel, and it can get a little bit expensive as well, depending on the amount you want to raise. As I mentioned, you might need audited financial statements. So the list can start to add up of costs before you've even launched your campaign. It's probably also worth noting again that with a crowdfunding campaign, the participation, the investors who are coming need to be attracted from the company's existing or created community and extended community. So if you're a European company and you have a European community and European customers, running an equity crowdfunding round in Canada would only allow you to take on Canadian investors. And if those investors have sort of never heard about your business, it would be very challenging to have a successful campaign. You'd need to spend considerable time building a community in Canada around your business and then running a campaign.
And we have a company here that's based both in the UK and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Does the same rule apply from an equity crowdfunding point of view that your head office is in one of those locations and that's where you can raise?
Yeah, so I don't know the full details of the crowdfunding rules in the UK. My understanding is it's the same sort of thing. So if you want to use the UK crowdfunding rules to take UK investors, you need to be a UK company. And the same thing in Canada, if you want to be taking money from Canadian investors, you need to be a Canadian headquartered company. They're not really structured in a way that's going to be super friendly to a kind of cross-border investing. Potentially what you could do is set up a subsidiary or find some way to have, one company raise in one jurisdiction that is raising capital, but it's also owned by a parent company in a different jurisdiction. We've seen that potentially work. So there is some ways to kind of do that.
All right, and now we've got the opposite question.
Yeah.
How can a Canadian company or can a Canadian company do an equity crowdfunding campaign in the US?
Right. So that's also a good question. So I just want to clarify sort of the separation of definitions for a second. So equity crowdfunding as a concept is simply the idea of a private company allowing small investments from a large number of people. So as a concept, there is a way for you to allow Americans to invest in your company. In terms of what are the rules of the legislation, you can't use Canadian legislation to raise from American investors. You need to use American legislation to raise from American investors. I know a little bit more about the American legislation, but again, I'm not a lawyer. So I would highly recommend you speak to an American equity crowdfunding platform or an American securities lawyer about this. In the United States, equity crowdfunding is regulated as something called Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding. Reg CF specifically only allows American companies to raise under Reg CF. However, there's a different regulation called Reg A. This regulation allows companies to raise from the broader public as well as accredited investors in larger amounts. It's similar to what I described as our offering memorandum. And so as a Canadian company, you could go to the United States and raise from American investors using Reg A or Reg A plus. Reg A is much more expensive to prepare than, for example, just a regular Reg CF, because you require potentially audited financial statements and you have to prepare a much longer offering document, essentially. So there's a lot more documentation and work involved in doing a Reg A campaign as a Canadian company in the United States, but it is possible. So if you're a Canadian company looking to raise from American investors, you can't just sort of throw it on an equity crowdfunding platform in the United States, and you can't throw it on a Canadian equity crowdfunding platform and take American investors. You would need to work with an American platform to do a Reg A offering.
Thank you for clarifying that and being very specific, because there is a lot of wiggle room in some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's clear as mud.
Yeah. um, this is kind of complicated, so I'm going to summarize it a little bit. But the question was, if your goal changes or direction of startup changes, do you need to notify the investors or refund them of their money? So I think there's two things. One is obviously during the campaign, I think, and then one is after you've invested and you moved on. What happens?
Definitely. So let's talk about during the campaign. So during the campaign, basically, you have gone through all this work to due diligence with the platform. You've prepared this offering document. All this information is live on the campaign page. This is the one official source of record. It's where all of the details are about your offering. And all this information, all the material information there has been verified by the platform as part of our due diligence process. If any of that material information changes, you need to notify the platform immediately, and the platform needs to immediately update both the offering document and the campaign page and notify all participating investors. Whenever there's a material change, any investor who's participated up until that date has a 48-hour period to request a full refund, no questions asked. So that's what happens if there's a pivot or a change during your campaign. Let's say the campaign has closed, it's now 6 months later, and you've suddenly used the money for something else, or you had to pivot or something like that. As part of the campaign, you outline to investors the reporting frequency that you're going to be giving them updates. It's not reporting to the government, but you're going to let them know how frequently you're going to talk to them and what they should expect to hear from you. Whether it's good or bad news, I highly, highly recommend that you maintain a consistent quarterly update schedule. Whether it's good or bad news, trust me, if you are trying to avoid mentioning something to them and you keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and then suddenly there's a big problem and you have to do a big pivot and it's all this sort of stuff, and that comes in one update and it's been like 8 months and they haven't heard from you, you're going to have some very upset investors. But if you're communicating consistently every quarter about what you're working on, the challenges you're facing, the things you're overcoming, your wins and your losses, obviously, I know you want to have it a bit more framed towards the wins, but as long as you're communicating openly and honestly, then people will be understanding if there's a situation where you need to pivot or you need to make a change and things like that. There is no legal way for them to get a refund after that point. If you're not meeting your obligations and sort of updating them and in the timeline that you said, again, there's not necessarily a legal way, because in the offering, you outline that there are risks and you may have to use the money for something else. And all these sort of risks are clearly outlined in the offering document themselves, which all the investors have the opportunity to read before investing. So we highly recommend that they do that. But even if there's no legal way for them to get any money back or anything like that, you want to make sure that you're communicating openly, and not just sort of disappearing for months on end and then suddenly coming with some very bad news or something like that. Just in terms of managing the relationship is what we would recommend.
You've seen a wide variety of different types of startups do successful crowdfunding on your platform,
Mhm.
from cafes all the way up to, I don't know, all different stuff. Can you give us some examples of the different types of companies that have been successful?
Certainly. So we've had a gold mine, sort of a very traditional small gold mining operation that is looking to sort of scale and eventually went public. So that's a more traditional, not a startup, but would sort of raise from investors and then go public on the CSE or the TSXV. So we've seen that. We've seen restaurants. We've seen tech startups doing a hardware and software play, creating, for example, like a phone or a device like that. We've seen pure tech startups. We've seen like a large scale tech startup in like food tech. We've seen real estate based businesses and developers. We've seen B2B SaaS. We've seen direct to consumer. Um, yeah, we've seen other sort of platform marketplace style businesses. We've seen, literally the entire range. We've done over 20 deals on Equivesto, and we've only been here 1 year so far. So we're continuing to grow and expand. But if you look even internationally, there's been almost every type of business you can think of under the sun has raised through equity crowdfunding.
I know there's a varying range, but can you tell me the length of the average campaign and how long it usually takes to prepare for that campaign so we get an idea for the total length of time?
Certainly. So campaigns can last a maximum of 90 days. We typically recommend that campaigns be scheduled to last only 45 days. But really, the campaign is your conversion moment. You want to be doing the preparation and community building work well before the campaign. And then really the campaign is the moment where all that prep work that you've done is just converting the people to come through. And then you sort of have those exciting press releases saying, we got 100% funded in 48 hours and stuff like that. So really, it really does depend on how strong the company's community is and how much work they've been doing to sort of build and nurture that leading up to a campaign. If a company has a great community that's well developed and nurtured, and they're simply going to sort of sign up, begin activating them for this purpose, and then run the campaign, then we'd say, okay, it's between 2 to 4 weeks for due diligence with the Equivesto platform. And then concurrent with that, we also would probably spend about a month working on pre-campaign marketing and deal structuring with the startup. So we might say in 6 to 8 weeks you can have the campaign up and running, and then you run your campaign for 45 days and then 30 days of closing. If the campaign is run very well and you already hit your maximum goal, the campaign closes the moment the maximum goal is hit. So in that sort of scenario, you could hit the maximum goal in 2 weeks and then the campaign closes, and then the 30 days of closing after that. Let's say it's a different scenario. You're getting started. You don't really have much of a community, but you want to work with both the platform and a professional marketing team to kind of grow your community in advance of the campaign. In perfect world scenario, we would recommend 3 to 4 months of work before the campaign launches to build that community and really develop that. So we would say, okay, 3 to 4 months before the campaign of marketing work, and then the 45-day campaign, and then the 30 days of closing. So if you've got kind of all your ducks in a row and you're kind of ready to roll, you could do the whole thing in 2.5, 3 months. If you really need some extra time, then you could take between 6 to 8 or 9 months to really build that community from scratch and do a fantastic job with that. And as a platform, the way our fees work and everything, we're set up where we only essentially get paid when your campaign is successful. We have a small upfront due diligence fee, but it doesn't cover even half the cost of the due diligence. So really, we're making our money when you have a great campaign. So we will work with companies very closely throughout the whole process. And we will often even say, maybe you want to delay your campaign by a month or two to do some additional work, and then to sort of get everything ready, and then run your campaign. We're not here to just push out all kinds of campaigns. For that reason, we have a success rate of over 70% of the companies that have launched on Equivesto.
I'm surprised we haven't had the questions about how much you charge yet. So, because normally that's what everybody's all over. I've got a couple more questions here, but did you want to just quickly touch base on what people pay for on your platform?
Yeah, so we charge two fees, nothing else. So the first fee is the application fee. It's $2,500, and that is upfront. And then we also charge a success fee. So this success fee is a percentage of the total amount that's raised as part of your campaign. We take 7% of your total raise amount in cash. We don't take any warrants. We don't take any additional things. There's no transaction fees. There's no hidden fees. There's no closing fees. There's no any fees like that. You will incur costs beyond the Equivesto platform, specifically on the marketing side and also on the legal side. So you should budget, at least a few $1,000, even if everything is already perfect on the legal side, to help review and prepare your offering document and to have your lawyers work on the closing as well. So there be some fees outside of Equivesto, but our fees are $2,500 upfront and 7% of your raise.
Got a couple other good questions here. Can you recommend a good equity crowdfunding marketing company to assist with community building?
Yes, there's a number of different equity crowdfunding firms that specialize in equity crowdfunding marketing firms that we have partnered with that even offer preferred pricing for clients we refer to them. I'm not going to just sort of shout them out here, but if you send me an email, I'm happy to introduce you to all of them. There's 4 that we are currently partnered with that specialize in equity crowdfunding marketing and would offer preferred pricing for our clients.
If the startup is in some controversial area, I love this question. Let's say sex toys. Is the startup allowed to do crowdfunding to the public? Any restrictions on investors? Example, age.
So when I talked about who's required to invest, you need to be the age of majority in your province because you're signing legal documents purchasing the shares. However, somebody can sign up and invest sort of in trust of another person. So we've actually had parents sign up and invest in trust of their own children to sort of gift them some shares in an exciting company that they both like. One startup that we actually had raised on the platform was founded by the entrepreneur father and his kids. They came up with the idea together. They built it together, and it involved the video game industry and was really cool. And we had some families sign up and invest with their kids in that business as well. So there's potential to have people invest who are under 18, but they can't have their own account. There needs to be a person controlling the account who's the age of majority in every jurisdiction. So, if you're doing a sex toy startup, no, you can still go out and talk to the public about your offering for sure. It would really be about, what's the size of your community, but there's no sort of legal restrictions. Obviously, if you are doing an illegal activity, then you can't equity crowdfund. So if you're running like a brothel, you can't equity crowdfund your brothel. But if you're a company making sex toys, you could certainly do an equity crowdfunding campaign.
Great. So we've had a lot of questions here, and if people are thinking about it, but don't know if it's right for their business, and want to find out more, what should they do?
Yeah, so if you want to find out more, I would really recommend visiting our learning center, equivesto.com/learn. We have 2 streams, one for investors and one for potential companies that provide a ton of more details about equity crowdfunding and how it works. We also have a boot camp for companies considering doing equity crowdfunding, as well as a short video series that talks about kind of everything you need to know about equity crowdfunding. You can also, as I mentioned, join the Equivesto community. We just launched it today. It's free, but sign up required. online location where individuals can learn a lot more about investing in general, startup tips, all sorts of stuff like that, and communicate with each other, but beyond just the Equivesto Learning Center.
And can people go to Equivesto to book a meeting to find out if it's right for them?
Definitely. If you want to chat with me about this directly, you've got my email right there on the screen. You can also add me on LinkedIn. You can send Craig a message and he'll set up a meeting. I'm on Twitter. I'm everywhere. You can also just reach out to Equivesto itself at Equivesto on most social medias, and at Equivesto Inc. on Twitter. So, reach out to us if you have questions. We're happy to chat.
Thank you for taking the time today. Thank for all the great questions in the chat room. Follow up with Alex or I if you need more information, and we'll connect you and make sure you're in the right direction. Really appreciate you taking the time today, Alex.
Thank you very much, Craig. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great